Hi everybody, this is Todd Olthoff from ToddOlthoff.com coming back at you with another screencast. And this week we're going to talk about the podcast feature of Lion's Server. Now, podcasts, as you know, are the ability to do either video or audio shows of sorts. This particular screencast that you're watching is a video podcast. And so podcast on your server gives you the ability to create your own podcasts. Not only that, but have those available for the users of your server to get access to them. In a lot of ways, it's like setting up your own mini YouTube of sorts for those that you have on your server or those that have access to it. And you're even able to access it outside of your network. So this is the basic podcast area right here in server, and you'll notice fairly simple again in the setup. There's a big on-off switch. I've got mine running, the dots there, so everything's good. It also shows down here that podcast server is running. It just has two settings, right? The setting that are the feeds viewable by, and you can limit who you want to view that, only the owners of the podcast or authenticated users or anyone. In this case, since it's going to be on your own wiki page and that kind of thing, it's behind your server anyway. Anyone's a pretty good one to set up. The other thing it has here is the ability for you to add administrators, and those are people that can add podcasts and make different things happen. And so if you click the plus button, you can pull up the different people that are there that could be administrators. So, I'm going to let me add myself to that one. So now my name's on there, and I could add the names of others that I want to be administrators of the podcast. But for right now, I feel like I just want to be the only one who can do that. And you'll notice as soon as I do that, the gear was running down here to be able to set that up. All right, so now I have the service running. Now, you see this Manage Library button here. Let me just click this for a second to show you. This is where your podcasts, when you're done, are going to show up. This is on my website, right? It's the main website that I talked about in the Wiki podcast, right? You can see the common areas here. We've got all the little buttons here, and you'll notice now we've got a podcast one that shows up that takes us to this screen right here, and we'll have our podcast there. So I'm going to close that, and you'll see that in a little bit once we get started. Now, what you want to do to get started making a podcast, you're saying, how do I get things in there, is you want to go to Podcast Publisher. And Podcast Publisher was something that was available when you started your server. When you downloaded downloaded Lion's Server, you got all these different podcast tools, and Podcast Publisher is one of them. And you can see this simple interface. It has my podcast name, Todd's Podcasts. I've got new podcasts, new movie episodes, those kinds of things that I can add, and adding a new episode here. Now, for it to be connected to our server, however, I need to come up to Podcast Publisher and go to Preferences. And on the Preferences here, what I need to do is I need to add in the server name that you've got. So server.example.com, something like that. And then you want to put in your username and your password so that information is in there for the administrator. So what happens is now it will hopefully connect it to our server so that information's there. And so that's where the library is going to be set up, so it knows it's connected to this particular server destination. Now you'll notice we also have a workflow, a remote workflow sharing destination. I'm just going to put in the same thing here. I'm really not going to cover this right now, but for the sake of putting it in, let me just put that in here. And we will cover that at another time. And a lot of times what happens with that is you have workflows that you can set up in the more advanced podcast situations. So I just filled that out to have that there, but now I know I've got everything in System Preferences here, so I know where it's going. Now to get started with a podcast, you simply click Add a New Episode here. And what it's done, as you can see here, is it's taken me to a screen that's a screen grab. So what I'm doing in kind of a funny way is I'm recording myself recording a screencast. And so this is how you would set this up on the video side. You can see there's a film strip area down here that you can click. You see this one here, and then there's a film strip that you can click as well that would just do the audio part of it. You can see the audio gauge here. You can see my desktop with all the different angles on it. And so simply what I would do is I would just click the record button right here, and we would start recording. So it counts down, and now I'm actually recording the podcast, and you can see the information down below counting down the number of seconds that my podcast is. And so this is how you would do this. And so you can record your podcast, and when you're done, you would just simply click this right here, and I think we'll stop right there. Click this button, and now what it's going to do is it's going to stop my podcast, it's going to load it, and now it's going to show what's been recorded. And you can see I've got QuickTime-like ability to edit it. I can trim the podcast, say, well, I want to stop it right. And if you watch, you can see the movement of my cursor there. I say, well, I want to stop it right here. And then you click the trim button, and what it'll do is it'll trim it to where I just put it. So now it stops at that point. So that information is done. Now I can come up here with my podcast. Now that I've got it done, let's say I'm happy with it. I have to put an episode in here. So I can say something like screen recording episode 1. And so that's going to be my title for my screencast right there. I can also click on info, and I can add other kinds of things here. And I can say, this is an example screencast using Lion Server podcast. Okay, and I can put that there. Now I can also show advanced features for labeling my podcast right here. So I can spoof the date if I recorded it today, but I really want it to show up for next week, or I want to have it show for days before. I can change that. I can also set the order that I want it to show up in iTunes, because this will be able to be exported to iTunes. I can put in keywords, like I'll put screencast in there as a keyword, so it's something that someone can look up, and I'll put podcast in there, and let's put in Lion, and let's put in server. All right, so that way people can find it if they want to. You can add an advisory label if you want to, explicit or clean. I put clean on that. If you had explicit content, I guess you could put that on there too as a warning. And then you would have a URL that you would put there, but I don't have this published yet, so that doesn't show up. All right, but now all my info's in there, and I feel pretty good about it. So I can hide the advanced now, and I can hide the info. So everything's set up. I like how this looks, and it's all there. Now I have the ability too, if I wanted to share it right from here. I could share it to iTunes, and it would automatically pop it into my iTunes library. I can share it to Mail. It will take it and attach it to an email document on my desktop, so it shows up on my desktop. And then I can put it in my podcast library or in a remote workflow. What I'm going to do is just leave that alone right now, and I'm just going to click Done. Now, when you click Done, it takes you back here, and now you'll notice that it has my screencast here, the one that we just recorded on this nice little pegboard here. And that information's sitting right there, and I've got everything going. Now, I can do a new podcast if I want, or I can come down here and I can do a new audio episode or a new movie episode. If I want to do audio, I can change it to audio, and now I can just do an audio recording. And all I'm going to do is record my audio. So let's do that real quick. So we have one of those. It's going to count down for me. And now I'm recording audio. And so this is an introduction to my podcast. This is an audio one that I'm adding to my workflow. And we'll say we're done with that. And so I'm going to click this to finish. And now I've got the audio wavelength here. So I can again change that to whatever I want. I can trim it and get done with it. I can put info in here. And I'll just say, audio podcast. I'll call that. So that's on here. And I'll put a 1 next to it. I've got info again up here that I can put if I want. I'm just going to leave that alone for now because you already know how to fill that out. And again, like the other one, I'm just going to click Done. And now you'll see I've got an audio podcast and I've got a video podcast in my timeline here. And I can go back into this at any time and I can re-record, I can fix it, I can change it if I want to, I can play it and look at it. Okay, now that I've got my podcast set up, I want to be able to publish these. So what I can do is click this little arrow up here that says Todd's Podcasts, and that's going to take me to a screen that shows the different podcasts on this corkboard, which is kind of nice. And let's say I want to put this one in, and I want to share this, and I want to share it with my podcast library. So what I would need to do is come up here to the menu item and click Share, and I'm going to share with my podcast library. Now I can do that right from the screencast as well. Or I can do it here if I want to do several of them. And since I came back to the corkboard, I'm just going to do it from here. And so now it says my episode's been published. All right, that's been published to my podcast on my server. Now I can click this Announce button, which will basically take me into email and allow me to announce to everybody that I have this new podcast, and all they've got to do is click this address area here to go see the podcast. So I can announce that with a really nice looking email, kind of built right in. Let me go back here for a minute. But instead what I want to do is I'm going to also publish this one. So let's get this one published. So I'm going to go up to Share. I'm going to publish this to the podcast library as well. And let's get that one published to my server. Okay, and it says everything's done. I'm going to say fine. Those are published and ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back into my server application here where it says Manage Library. I'm just going to click this little link so it takes me to my podcast. And you'll notice it shows my podcast here now, right in the podcast list for everybody to find. If I click on that, Now you'll see I've got my screen recording episode 1. It's sitting right here. I can show the description if I want to, which gives that little information that I wrote down there. I also have the ability to play it right from here. So if I click play, it's going to load the preview now. And you hear it. And here's all the information. Okay, so you can see that recording was there. Now it's in my podcast library, and now it's all ready to go. Okay, for those of you that probably noticed, both screencasts didn't show up, and so I thought I would show you that. We just had to refresh the browser, but I thought I'd come back here and show you what that looks like by clicking the Manage Library button, going back into my podcasts, and now you can see the audio podcast is there as well as the screen recording podcast. And so just like with the screen recording one, if I click play, all of a sudden now it'll play my audio podcast, and so it has a little screen that shows how it works. So let me just put that down. So now you can see that both of the podcasts are sitting right there, right on my server. And so this really is kind of a neat way to have your own personal YouTube that you can share with your family, that you can share audio and video type podcasts. It's a really simple system to kind of get you going on those kinds of things, and will add some interest to your family's website. Well, that's all I have for this week on Lion Server Podcast. I'll be back at you next week with another screencast to help you learn how to do more things with your Mac.